Thank you so much. Before I start with the official start of the webinar, I would also just like to plug the Trade Experts, because that's another organization that I started, and we just, let's see, 2 weeks ago, we managed to get all the infrastructure up so that we could open up for membership. And it's membership not just for women, but also for men. And it's about, networking across awesome trade experts all over the world and all walks of trade. And Ben here is a member too. So head on over, check us out, because it's a really great resource, or we think so. And also we have, if you're from an LDC, it's free of charge to join us, and half price off if you're a student, and otherwise it's only 50 euros. So I just felt like I needed to do that public announcement for that. So welcome over there. Also, Syed, since you're doing your job market paper here, is it okay that people then reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Because you're in the group.
Yes,
yeah, and you're in our group, right?
Yes.
Excellent. All righty then. So today we have a very special seminar, and it's really it's based on passion, which I think is so cool. It's an awesome topic, but it's also the speakers that we have today are really passionate about the subject, as is Ben and I. And so we're super proud. We talked about Syed, so I'm just going to start with Philippe Legrain first. He is the founder of Open Political Economy Network, which is an international trade tank that focuses on openness issues, and it started in 2016 out of London. He's also a senior visiting fellow at the European Institute at LSE. I've known him since his time at The Economist, and he was also a special advisor to Barroso in the European Commission. And he is this awesome guy who, he's like really focused on openness. I don't have to make any more introductions, because as soon as he speaks, you'll see what I mean. But it's really cool to have him here because he has the 30,000 foot view of all of this and has focused especially on it. So we're super happy to have you here, Philippe. And Syed, we were talking about this before everyone came on. As we did our prep talk, it's really cute because it's come full circle. So coming originally from Bangladesh, but he is now a visiting associate professor of economics at St. Benedict's in St. John in Minnesota. And he's on the job market with a paper on migration, which was what he started out with, studying for a long time ago. And then he took Ben's class on gravity modeling 10 years ago, and then thought that was so much fun, so he went into doing a PhD. So how's that for inspiration and labor of love? And so we will be giving Syed at first very strictly, because it's me, I'm holding this webinar. I'm harder on time than Ben. We're going to give you 20 minutes to present your paper. And then we're going to let Philip in. And then after that, we open up to questions and comments from everyone. And I also would like to just take 1 second to just thank everyone who's tuning in today. There's some really awesome people in the attendees. And so I'm sure that you're going to have some really great comments, like Mia's here, for example. So without further ado, Syed, why don't you start? Go ahead. And it's 15:08:06.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. And a special thanks to Ben and Hannah for giving me the opportunity to present my paper titled Immigration and Trade, Extensive versus Intensive Margin Across Skill and Product Quality. It is co-authored with one of my friend, Ahmed Aziz. He is also one of the attendees in this webinar. So you can also hear something from him as well. Before going into the details, first let me give you the agenda for today's presentation. And this paper, it actually studies the impact of immigrants on extensive and intensive margin of US export. In particular, in this paper, we are trying to answer two questions. One that is, do immigrants increase the extensive margin or intensive margin of trade, or both? And the second one we are connecting, that is,
yeah, can I just break in here for just 1 second? Would you just explain what intensive versus extensive margin is for people who are not familiar with that?
Yes, I'm going to explain it a bit.
Sorry.
Thank you. And the second question we are connecting, that is, does the impact varies with skill level of immigrants and the quality of the products? And then I'll go mainly with the empirical estimation and results, followed by policy implication related to immigration and trade. So as Hannah already mentioned, like what is extensive margin and the intensive margin of trade, or what we actually mean by these words. So extensive margin of trade, that is simply we can say the new product or new market we are exploring or we are exporting in. And intensive margin, that is the average value of our already traded product or in already trading destination, the average value we are making. So intensive, that means the average value of our existing trade, and extensive, that is something new we are creating, or by this two words we are meaning in this way. Okay, so first I'm giving some background and how we are motivated for this study, and then I will follow with some data and empirical issues and our main findings from this study. So from this graph, you can see United States, they are attracting a lot of immigrants, and it's almost 45 million people they are living in the United States. They born outside of this country, which is almost 13.7% of the total population. And this share, it's increasing over time, from 1970, when it was around 5% of total population. Not only the trend, it's going in an increasing trend, it also coming with some diversity. We can find this immigrant population, it's coming from all over the world. Almost all the countries in the world, they are representing or they're consisting in the United States immigrant population. We also find some other dynamics as well. Previously, we find Mexican immigrants, they are the major share in United States population, but in recent time, we are also following some less developed countries or lower middle income countries. They are in the high growth section in the immigrant population. And from this graph, as you can see, in 2018, the most immigrant, they came from Nepal or Burma or Myanmar, whatever name you call, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia. So we find this trend of North American, they are migrating in United States. The trend is going to be a bit diversified, or it's changing over time. The other fact we also find, that is the skill and the education level in United States immigration population, or the demographics, is also changing. From this table, you can find from the first panel, the share of immigrants by country types. And we have the OECD countries and non-OECD countries, these two classification. The total population, the immigrant share in total population from the non-OECD countries, it's almost 55%. And from the OECD countries, it's around 45%. we also classified in terms of their skill level, and from non-OECD countries, we find a significant portion, they are coming as a skilled labor or high skilled labor. On the other hand, from the OECD countries, it's coming, the major share is coming as a low skilled worker. And if we take a look on the percentage change of immigrant by country types and their skill level, that you can see from the panel C in here, you can find for non-OECD countries, this growth rate is way higher compared to the OECD countries. And especially for the high skilled population, you can see it's almost 190% for non-OECD countries. Okay, so next, we find a few other statistics for the trade classification. We know, like United States, they are exporting in an increasing trend over the time, and it increased from 364 billion to 1.5 trillion over the period of 1990 to 2017. But what most interestingly for us, we find the unique number of product United States from each state, they are exporting all over the world. This trend is also increasing. And in here, we are just showing the unique products each state they are exporting by each country. We only find the exception during the financial crisis time. During that time, the number of product, it was decreasing. Then we came with some other information, like the immigrants, where they are residing, and what about the export structure for those states. And we find the left panel, the immigrants from the top 15 high growth countries, and you can see the two coastal areas. There is the major share of the immigrants they are residing, like the West Coast or East Coast. And we also find like in the southern east side, Florida or the Texas, this area, that is the major share of the immigrants they are residing. And the right panel, which is showing the share of uniquely traded products from each of the states. And again, we can find in that section as well, the uniquely traded products, it's concentrating on the east and the west. So we can plainly say, if in a particular state, it's coming more of the immigrants or more of the immigrants they are residing in those sections, probably they are going to export more unique products, or as well they can export more more in terms of the value as well. So that was something we find really interesting to take a look. Is it really a valid thing? If there is coming more immigrants, they are going to export more, or they are going in other way. So one potential channel we are thinking in here is the increase in immigrant. They might benefit the US international trade, and the logic we are bringing, new immigrants, they bring information and skill from abroad, and they're going to reduce the transaction cost between immigrants home and the US. And when a firm in the United States, they are employing some of the immigrants, they are gaining some access to the knowledge regarding the business opportunities or relevant market institutional structure regarding the source country, which may be costly when they need to explore those markets. And when they're finding these immigrants, it's becoming easier for them to reduce the cost and thereby reaching in that destination market or the source market. So in terms of the literature, we find there is a handful amount of literature they are studying on the link between immigration and trade. And some of them, they are also going with the intensive or the extensive margin. So we are just summarizing a very few of them. Perry and Requena in their 2010 paper, they find there is a significant effect of the stock of migrants on the extensive margin rather than the intensive margin. On the other hand, Coughlin in 2011, they find the ethnic network, it increased the trade of intensive margin, not the extensive margin. So you can find that it is a opposite view. One is showing the intensive margin and another is showing the extensive margin. And in recent Kang, they find the immigrants, they are impacting or they have an effect on the extensive and the intensive margin in both. And the logic they are bringing, like decreasing both the fixed cost and the variable cost, it's playing some role on increasing extensive and intensive margin by using the data for Korean economy. So we find maybe it will be a good opportunity if we can find some link for US state level export data and connecting with the immigration information, what we can find for the extensive margin and the intensive margin in their export behavior. Okay, so what we are contributing in the literature in this study. First, we estimate the effect of immigrants network on US state level export across different skill group of immigrants and the quality of the product. We did the analysis of immigrants effect on US state level export, both on the extensive and the intensive margin for disaggregate product level or SITC 4-digit level. Third, we estimate the ethnic elasticity for intensive and the extensive margin by immigrants skill level and also for the quality of the product. Okay, so I'm not going to dig a bit on the on this theoretical section. If you really have some interest on these theoretical setup, you can read our full paper. There is some link. But I'm showing few of the lines what build on this empirical strategy. We are following the Eaton-Cotam framework, and from there we are driving our estimable equation based on the Eaton-Cotam and Chendy in 2008 paper. In equation 1, the left-hand side, it's showing the export from state J to country I for product K. And that is we are taking in the right hand side controlling for two of the fixed effects, SI, that is the country fixed effect, and S sub J, that is the state fixed effect. And we have some trade cost that is introduced in terms of country I to state J, representing with D sub I and J. Then we are decomposing this trade cost into variable trade cost and the fixed cost. Okay, so in here you can find we have two parameters to estimate. One is the sigma and another is the gamma. Sigma, that is the elasticity of substitution across product or the quality of the product, and gamma, that is the productivity parameter for the farms or the outputs. And we are saying when sigma k is going to be smaller, that means goods are highly differentiated, and when sigma k is high or close to 1, we are saying goods are more like homogeneous product. So if you have some more interest on the theoretical section, you can go in our paper and you can find these funky notations or the mathematical derivation. I'm not going to put some time on there due to the time. Then from this segment, we are coming with our variable cost and the fixed cost and how they are connecting with the intensive margin and the extensive margin. So we find when we are talking about the variable cost, it only affecting the productivity parameters, or due to that, we can find the sigma minus k, which is the intensive margin, and the extensive margin, which is gamma minus sigma minus k. But due to the canceling out of sigma, we can find only variable costs they are affecting the productivity parameters. And fixed cost, we find it's not affecting the intensive margin, and it's affecting the extensive margin portion in this setup. So from there, we find our final estimable equation. So we wrote it like aggregate export from state J to country I. It's thus the summation of our intensive margin and the extensive margin. Or we can say the new product we are exporting, or new market we are reaching, times the in summation with our average value of export we are making for existing or the new market. So in here, in the left hand side, for intensive margin, we have the average value of export. It's going from state J to country I at time T for the product of K. We are controlling for the state fixed effect. We are controlling for the country fixed effect. We are taking some of the gravity variables like distance, use of internet, common language, border, and some other trade frictions we are including in the variable of M, that also country and state specifics. And for the extensive margin, we are taking the number of products we are exporting, or the number of product it's going from state J to country I at time T. Okay. So these are the two baseline regression we are using for our empirical estimations. Okay. So what type of data we are using for our conclusion or for our analysis? US state level trade information, it's coming from the Scott's database, and the main data source is coming from the US Census Bureau data on trade by shipment level, and this is coming with the shipment from East Portal district to 234 countries by SS 10-digit level, and then we convert the port district to the exporting estate. Some of the estate, they don't have any port in the own estate, but they are reaching towards the nearby estate, estate or nearby ports. So when we are converting this, instead of 48, we are getting 30 estates, and when we are matching it with the immigration source of immigration countries, the country is also reduced to 174. Okay, so then we are matching it with the product quality. Product quality variable, it's coming from the IMF website. They are reporting it since 1960 to 2014 by SITC revision 1. But as our trade statistics, it's coming for the SITC revision 2. So we converted this revision 1 to SITC revision 2. So in this graph, you can find the quality index and the unit values for US car exports or the auto export. And particularly, you can see the blue line, which is showing the quality calculated by the IMF, and red line, which is showing the unit values. Why we are presenting these two? Often you can find like the trade literature, they are using the price or unit values as a proxy for quality as well. But we find the unit values, they are subject to some other frictions as well. It can be due to the demand, or it can be due to the exchange rate issues. But we find there is a lot of the variations or fluctuations in the unit values compared to the quality we are calculating from the IMF database. And this quality, it also coming with.
I just have to give you your heads up here, because you need to wrap up. We've done 20 minutes.
Okay, I'm just coming on the empirical sections and the result.
Excellent.
And the immigration data, we are using the stock of immigrants by country of origin and the state of destination. It's coming from the US Census data compiled by the IPAMS. And the occupational statistics we are using is coming from the NAMPOR Boyd occupational data. Instead of the plain level of education, we are using this occupational statistics to match it with the immigrants they are working in the United States. And the distance, instead of taking the distance between the two capital cities, we are taking the data for each state to the port or the source country, their major ports from where they are making the shipments. And other gravity variables, we are taking it from the CEPI database. Okay, what do we find from our exercise? So we find a 10% increase in immigrants. It's increasing the aggregate export by 1.6%. And if we are digging a bit on that, we find like if we only taking the high skilled immigrants, it's going to increase the export by 1.4%. And if we consider only about the low skilled workers, we find it's 1.37% for a 10% increase of the immigrant. And if we take a look on the high quality product and the low quality product, you can find for a 10% increase in the immigrant, they are going to increase the export of high quality products of around 2.2%. And for the low quality products, it's around 2.9%. Okay, so from there, we find immigrants in the United States, they have more impact in creating low quality export. So it's not something like surprisingly we find like US, they are exporting more of the low quality products when they are reaching or they are getting some of the immigrants. But this fact is coming like based on our previous, one of the previous slides we shown in recent time, the top 15 growing immigrants countries, they are coming from the low and the lower middle income sections or lower middle income countries. Those labor section, they are creating the demand for the product in the United States in their home country, that is also in their expenditure capabilities, or they can reach, that's going with the low quality products. Okay. So we find like the simple OLS estimation for network effects, it can be biased and there can have some endogeneity issue. And that's why we took the IB strategy. And the IB, we are using the number of foreign born residents. They're instrumented with the imputed flow and the stock of immigrants proportion to their original distribution in each of the state. So we took the, in 1990, what was the distribution of the immigrants in each of the state, and then we find the growth rate, and that we considered as our IB in here. So this strategy is going to reduce the SARS cost associated with the matching of buyer and seller, and it's going to better predict or it's going to remove the endogeneity issue in here as well. So what we find from there, we find when we are controlling this this endogeneity issue, for each level of immigrant increase, our coefficient is going to be better, or it's predicting better. So for a 10% increase of immigrants, instead of 1.6, now we find for all products, it's going to be around 2%. So for a 10% increase in immigrants, there is a 2% increase of the total trade. Similarly, we also find for the high quality products and the low quality products, for high quality, we find this can be 2.4%, and for the low quality, it's going to be around 3.7%. So from there, we find what can happen for, or what we can find for the intensive margin and the extensive margin. For the case of all product, we find extensive margin, they are playing a bit more role in the export, or immigrants, they are playing more role in the export extensive margin of the export compared to the intensive margin. And when we look at the high quality, we find the high skilled immigrants, they are impacting more on the high quality product compared to the low quality, compared to the low skilled workers. And when we are taking a look on the low quality product, we find low skilled workers, they are exerting more effort, or they are contributing more on the low quality product as well. So from there, we are finding the conclusion.
Are we going to the conclusion? Yeah, excellent. Conclusions. We're running out of time. We are out of time. Way out of time.
So from there, we find, or we are concluding, like high skilled immigrants, they are affecting the intensive margin more than their low skilled counterparts. And we already said, like it is coming the high quality product with their ability to receive and process more of the complex information better when we receive some high skilled workers. And low skilled immigrants, they have higher impact on the extensive margin, except like the low quality product we find. And this exception we find, like maybe due to the recent influx of high skilled immigrants, they're coming into the US from the lower division of the countries. And in terms of the policy, we are asking, or we are sharing two questions. Should government follow more liberal migration policies, or should regions have more voice in immigration policies? So we find, like when we are talking about the liberal migration policies, potential gain in export earnings, it might help to offset such of the welfare loss from the immigrations. We find, like migrants, they are getting the benefits they are receiving compared to the impact they are giving on the economy. So we find, like migrants, they are paying more of the taxes, or they are contributing more on the labor force or the growing sectors compared to the natives. So it's not like migrants is only harming the economy; they are also boosting up the productivity or boosting the export for any of the regions as well, or the states as well. When we are talking about whether regions, they should have more voice in immigration policies, yes, regions, they should have more voice in terms of increasing, or in terms of welcoming of the more of the immigrants. Basically, the immigration policies, they are designed for the country as a whole, not by the region specific or state specific. Different state, they have different different requirements. So our judgment is each region, they should have some voice in terms of setting their own immigration policies. For example, in previous, the two side-by-side plot of the maps, we shown the two coasts, they are receiving more of the immigrants, at the same time they are exporting as well. So we can expect, like if this two coastal areas, they have different policies to welcoming immigrants, it would be better for them to more export or more finding a new markets as well. So given the time constraint, I'm stopping in here. And that's the suggestion for the.
That's excellent, Syed. We have a saying here in Sweden that goes, wonderful is short. And this is such a great paper, and there's so much to cover, but unfortunately we only have people for an hour. So we're just going to have to wrap it up there. So thank you so very much. And without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor, or the mic, or the screen, or whatever we're down to Philip to take it from here.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Syed, for presenting your very interesting paper. I'm sort of here under false pretenses in the sense that was when Hannah approached me, she said, come and tell us about all the interesting stuff that you're doing. And then at the same time, I've been shoehorned as a discussant to Syed's paper, which I think is a bit unfair to him and a bit unfair to me. But a bit unfair to him because he deserves a proper academic discussant, and a bit unfair to me because I'm being asked to do two different things at once. Let me just say, I mean, I think the paper is very interesting. It kind of speaks to my heart in the sense that right from when I started writing about immigration, I started looking at it from a trade perspective, and I felt very strongly that the academic debate and indeed the political debate about immigration was incredibly narrow because it tended to focus on basically short-term labor market and public finance effects, and incredibly narrow because it basically assumed that immigrants were kind of generic people who fit into either a category of high skilled or low skilled, and that's basically the only ways in which their attributes differed. And I thought that was incredibly narrow and incredibly misleading. And you know, I'm delighted to see that with papers like Syed's that we're moving on a bit. It made me think actually of a really, really interesting paper by Christopher Parsons and Pierre-Louis Vézina, who did a paper on the beautiful natural experiment of the impact of Vietnamese refugees in the US on trade. And basically they were allocated across the US in 1975, basically for random political reasons. So you get round the endogeneity problem of you're not really sure whether it's the trade boosting the migration or the migration boosting the trade. And what you see at the time, there was an embargo on trade between the US and Vietnam. And then suddenly in 1994, it's lifted. And then you see, well, okay, how does the pattern of exports from the US to Vietnam differ across states? And you see very strongly that those states that received more Vietnamese refugees back in 1978 actually tend to be more active in trading. And it's not just true in terms of the value of trade, but also in terms of the range of products traded. And I thought that was a really interesting paper. I mean, I'm a bit surprised actually it isn't quoted in your, isn't mentioned in your references, because I think it's a really interesting paper. It was recently in the Economic Journal, but before that it's been circulating for a while. So that's basically my initial thoughts on your very interesting paper, and that's a pity we didn't have time to consider all of it. In terms of my own work, as I said, I started off as a trade correspondent for The Economist magazine. I was then special advisor to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, from which I wrote my first book on globalization. And at the time, globalization was talked about almost exclusively in trade and investment terms. And it seemed to me as a logical consequence of that book that I also actually look at the missing part of globalization, which is people flows, immigration. And that led me to my first book, which is called Immigrants, Your Country Needs Them, which started to look at the broader impacts, including the relationship between immigration and trade. And then, since then, I came out in 2007. I've done a host of different things, and my own thinking on immigration has moved on. And I've come to think that the two crucial aspects to immigration are ones which are basically, often neglected in public debate. The first is the impact, the dynamic impacts, the impacts on enterprise and innovation, which, if you think about it, are actually at the heart of the matter. And basically, if you're using comparative static models, as is often the case both in trade and indeed in migration, you're missing the point. We don't live in a comparative static world. But secondly, absolutely crucial was the diversity of immigrants. The diversity of immigrants in terms of not just their skills, but their perspectives, their experiences, their contacts, and crucially how they interact indeed with each other and indeed with locals. So it seems to me actually the absolute biggest benefits of immigration are not a kind of immigrant versus a local story. They're an immigrant with local story, and they're about, and you can see, it's in the business world, there's a whole kind of focus in diversity and the benefits of the diversity of teams. And it's mostly spoken about in terms of equality of opportunities. And I think actually, while equality of opportunities are obviously very important, that a lot of it actually is about improved economic performance, improved creativity, and indeed improved business and trade. And so I followed up with my most recent book, which is called Them and Us, How Immigrants and Locals Can Thrive Together. Now, moving towards slightly more academic work, as Hannah mentioned, I set up a think tank back in 2015 called Open Political Economy Network, Open. And we were set up in the midst of the crisis over refugees in Europe. And so the first piece of work that we did was called Refugees Work, a Humanitarian Investment that Yields Economic Dividends. And that was applying some of the insights of my previous work on immigration to show actually that this whole debate about refugees, which were looked at even by, either by the critics of refugees as a burden that you want to avoid, a threat even, or indeed even by the advocates of refugees as a burden that needed to be shared equitably, that we had some kind of humanitarian duty to receive. And actually that, yes, although there are short-term fiscal costs to welcoming refugees, that actually there are significant economic and indeed cultural benefits from it, and therefore it was much more productive to look at this in terms of an investment that yields dividends rather than simply as a burden that either needs to be avoided or to be shared. And we've done quite a lot of work on the impact that refugees have had, and I've already mentioned, the paper by Vezina on refugees, Vietnamese refugees and trade. More recently, we've been looking at the impact of minority entrepreneurs in particular. And obviously that's something which is particularly relevant given the Black Lives Matter movement in the US and indeed globally. And it's slightly different from looking at immigration because we're not just looking at so-called first generation, we're also looking at second generation, or indeed we're actually looking, I don't like the words first and second generation because at the end of the day, you're not a second generation immigrant. If you're born in a country, you're a local, whoever your parents were. But anyway, that's the academic term. And looking at the impact that, that minority entrepreneurs have. And we've done a first one called Minority Businesses Matter, which looks at the UK, and now we're in the proceeds of fundraising for a second one, which is Minority Business Matter to Europe. And the really interesting story is that while you might think that the benefits of immigration in terms of stimulating enterprise or indeed trade, the diversity of perspectives and skills and contacts and so on, knowledge about different markets, that was particular to the newcomers, to the first generation of immigrants. And actually you see that it's carried over to greater or lesser extent to future generations. So we did a fantastic report here called Minority Businesses Matter. All of this is on our website, opennetwork.net. Now, how much of this is relevant to what everyone on this Zoom call is working on? I don't know. As I said, I was invited here to talk about a variety of things. I think I have a kind of final message. Is that I'm delighted that through the work of Syed and others, that finally the academic community is moving on, or at least starting to move on, and considering the broader impacts of immigration. He quoted a paper by Giovanni Perri. Giovanni Perri is a friend at the University of California at Davis. He's probably done the most comprehensive work on all the various aspects, and including the impact that trade has on migration and migration has on trade. We've seen, right at the highest level of policy making, the IMF come up with its own estimates, which try to put a number on, well, okay, we know that there are all these broader impacts of immigration. It's not just about the short-term labour market and public finances. It's also about the dynamic effects. It's also about the age and demography effects. It's also about the interaction between people at different skill levels, and they come up with this cross-country finding that a 1% increase in the immigrant share leads to, in the long term, a 2% increase in GDP per capita. And the interesting thing about that is that it's both among low-skilled, so-called low-skilled immigrants and among high-skilled immigrants. One final thought: I hate the word low-skilled immigrant. I think the idea, one, that you label people as low skill is kind of offensive. And I think if there's one thing we've learned from this coronavirus pandemic, is that people who are doing incredibly difficult jobs, which are dismissed by the economic profession or indeed by politicians as being low skilled, actually most people on this call probably wouldn't be capable of doing many of those jobs because we'd find them too tiring or too distressing. And actually, what this wonderful piece of research by the IMF shows is it's not just true that they're making a huge individual contribution, whether it's cleaning our hospitals or keeping public transport running, but also that filters through into a broader impact on GDP per capita, and therefore the political debate ought to reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Philip, and thank you for being such a good sport, even though I put you both in an unreasonable position. Obviously, I didn't mean to, but I think it turned out really, really well, because one of the things that we want to do here, and one of the things that we did in our very first webinar with Bernard Hoekman, was to have him list a number of things that he thinks should be researched more. And I think that that's what you're absolutely bringing to us here. So even though I put you guys in an impossible situation, I'm very happy with it, because it turned out really well. Don't you think, Ben? And so we have 10 more minutes. And I'm going to hand over to Ben, because I've just been babbling all day, and you're best at just grabbing and running with it. Yeah,
let me just jump in. So thanks to both for for a great paper presentation and also a great discussion. Again, it is difficult to wear multiple hats in a forum like this, but I think it was done very well. And what we're trying to do here is it's not purely an academic exercise. We are really interested in the policy side as well. So I as an immigrant myself, 3 times over actually, I've heard a lot that I agreed with, not just as an economist, but also as a person. So I think it's been a great session from that point of view. Let me put a few questions into the mix. I think that one thing that I thought about, Syed, as you were going through the paper is the issue of sort of spillover effects, and I think the example that Philip raised of the Vietnam story is an interesting one, because there's another story like that. If you think of the United States, in your first graph, one of the deep green states showing the large sort of increase in immigrants is Florida. And we know that one community that's pretty important in Florida is the Cuban community. But we also know that because of, pretty silly US policy, we can't export to Cuba at the moment. So what I'm wondering is whether or not you can, slice and dice the data a bit differently to see whether or not there's a regional spillover effect. That is to say, where we see Cuban immigration, for example, do we see an increase in exports to the Caribbean region or to Latin America and the Caribbean more broadly? I think there's also a case for doing that if we think of other areas, West Africa is one. So we know that Nigerian immigrants to the United States tend to be have very high levels of qualification and schooling, much higher than that of Native Americans. But do we see the exports going just to Nigeria, or do we see it going to other parts of West Africa as well? So is there a way that you can either sort of look into the results to see whether or not that sort of thing is happening, or change the model to try and capture those sorts of spillovers?
Thank you, Ben, for the suggestion. Yes, we tried, and there is another paper we are working on where we are also looking at the third country impact that I was sharing with Philippe before. The idea in there we are working is like when you have a one-to-one contract or the bilateral contract, we are expecting preference channel or information channel is going to play some role in order to increase the export or import between these two countries. But that can have some third country that you are mentioning, like the spillover effect, like some immigrants, they are coming from Nigeria, or from that Nigerian immigrant, a US firm or employer, they are receiving some information about some other African countries, or good information about the African countries, and they are trying to access, or they're reaching those markets as well. So how those third country impact or third country effect is playing some role in interacting with the immigration, that we are looking at in another paper. Unfortunately, we didn't start that segment in the current version, but thank you for your suggestion. Maybe we can incorporate some of those results in this paper as well.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll look forward to seeing it. The other point that I wanted to raise is kind of an extension. I mean, I really liked Philippe's comment that we need to think in dynamic terms about the effect of immigration, because it's true, the literature is really dominated by this kind of labour markets literature, and even though I think that literature has now gone pretty solidly in a helpful direction, showing that the labour market effects are basically very small, I think we get to a point in the trade literature where we might actually be seeing something much larger in a positive sense. And so another idea that I had is, whether or not you can get more into the mechanism of sort of what's going on. I'm building here on a question that came in the Q&A. When we think of the intensive and extensive margin, there's variable costs and there's fixed costs. But is the mechanism the same in both cases? That is to say, is there an information mechanism or is it something else? And one way you could potentially test for that, given that you've got quite detailed product data, you could use some of the measures around of the information intensity of particular goods. So if you think of some of the work on institutions in trade, they've focused in detail on this question of sort of the informational content of goods. That is to say, how complex it is to bring all the stuff together that enables you to make the good. Is that a direction that you could potentially take the work in as well?
Yes, we are. We are thinking in that way as well to incorporate in our paper, but in our current settings, we don't have enough information to find or classify, like for each of the product, the complexity for producing in the home country as well as in the source country, so that we can say like whether due to this the complexity they are production complexity, they are exporting it or importing it from the destination market to the source market. But we are searching some of the farm level database from where we can find for each of the farm how they are representing with their export structure as well as the inputs they are sharing for their production. From there we can maybe put some more information on the complexity and also the issue of connecting both the variable and the fixed cost in supply and the demand side as well. So by demand side, I'm meaning like when someone from Africa, they are demanding some goods for from going from a US state, instead of importing, if they are going to produce in their home country, what are the cost and what are the input requirements they have, as well as the demand for that homegrown product versus the imported product. Like, like some of the literature they're mentioning in a developing countries, or when the country is starting developing, receiving higher income, they have some preference for the foreign goods rather than the home goods of similar products. So if we have a farm level data, we can do that, and we are actually working on reaching the farm level export data for US, and maybe from there we can exert some of the information in there.
Great, thanks. Let me maybe shift to a policy issue for the last question. I'll actually throw this one to Philip, because one thing I really liked very much about the work that you described is that you're looking at all kinds of immigration, that is to say refugees and other forms of immigration as well. And I just wanted to ask you, the point that you made about these terms that we still use, that I think, I agree with you that we shouldn't, of sort of high skill and low skill. When we have research that sort of breaks something out by skill level or by occupational category, particularly in the context of immigration, do we run a risk in a policy sense of encouraging this shift that I think we've been seeing in the UK, in my home country, Australia, we've had this for a long time, of moving to a kind of a points-based immigration system. That is to say, where you privilege incoming immigrants with particular skills and qualifications. Firstly, is that a good thing from a policy background, or is it something that we should be wary of? And if we think we should be wary of it, what are the political, economy and economic arguments that we make to try and broaden out the base so that we are maintaining a much more open immigration system?
Well, let me just make a brief comment firstly on the interaction between immigration and trade. One of the people we interviewed for our most recent report was called Poonam Gupta, and she moved from India to the UK, and she spotted an opportunity to start a business on the basis of her knowledge of both the UK and the Indian market, which was that there was a lot of waste paper in the UK which was simply thrown away, and that there would be a market in India for that recycled paper. Therefore, it was the knowledge of the two, that information advantage, which allowed her to start a business. But the interesting, crucial thing is, she said, once you have that knowledge of exporting, which you then can apply it to other markets, which explains how that initial thing, which is just about, well, I have an advantage which enables me to set up a business which creates trade between the UK and India, then applies more broadly. Actually, I can be a super exporter because I've got that advantage. I think that's a really interesting kind of anecdote, which kind of brings to life the sort of things that Syed has written about. In terms of the policy angle, I mean, I think basically the economic description, it's not just about the value-laden notion that some jobs are high skilled and therefore worthwhile and desirable, and some are low skilled and therefore not. I think all jobs have a series of attributes attached to them, and that those attributes cross over between so-called high skilled and low skilled. And I think actually simply from a sort of, even from an academic perspective, I think it's kind of too narrow to just kind of categorize it like that. And actually, we ought to look at those set of attributes, and that set of attributes actually, sometimes you see it actually in the technology debate, where you try and break down jobs into different tasks, some of which are replicable by technology and some aren't. But also you can have tasks, how physically arduous things are, how emotionally unpleasant they are, and what is how intellectually challenging they are. In terms of the point system, I think these are in fashion around the world. Your country, or your home country, and indeed Canada, were pioneers in creating point systems. And though each of them in practice run much more complicated immigration systems, in large part because actually point systems don't work. They have an appeal to them because they seem kind of fair. It's like a score at university, you meet the grade or you don't, and they seem objective. And it seems kind of self-evident at first glance that you want the so-called high-skilled people and not the so-called low-skilled people. But actually, first of all, very often, the actual people who are in demand in a country, whose immigration would benefit the country most, actually would be often so-called low-skilled jobs. So in every country is aging, they need people to work in care homes. Young local people don't want to work in care homes. They aren't particularly high-skilled according to a point system. They would certainly be tough according to an attribute system. and those are kind of neglected. There's also more broadly, the perverse incentives of only allowing in people who have, degrees or indeed postgraduate degrees, who lead to the absurdity of people, who are driving cabs with a PhD, and that happens in both Canada and Australia. The crushing argument against that is I don't know any politician or indeed any respectable academic who would advocate, say, that the entry of people to come work in, say, London or Silicon Valley or indeed Sydney from other parts of the country should be regulated on the basis of a point system. And you think actually if it was a rational way for allocating business hires and deciding who should be able to move and who shouldn't, that you want to see it replicated at other levels apart from the national level. And of course, you merely have to say that. People say that's completely absurd. Neither politicians nor bureaucrats have any way of second guessing the vast needs of a complex, ever-changing economy, and nor do I think that their prejudices should dictate that. And yet it's taken as not just a kind of necessity, a political necessity of a world where we don't have free movement of people, but actually is seemingly an example of rational policy making when it's at a national level. And I think that's just nonsense.
Great, thank you. I think that's a great note to end on, that obviously when we're talking about immigration and trade, there's a lot more than economics going on. It's part of the discussion, but there's a ton of politics and all sorts of things that go in there. So I think that really is the perfect note to leave it on. So Hannah, how about I hand back to you for your wrap up?
Well, I keep thinking entrepreneurship. I keep thinking entrepreneurs in all of this, not just people coming over for jobs, but actually making jobs. That's what I see here. And I think about all the time, like it's the same family of women who, do the nails and have this fantastic Vietnamese restaurant here. And I'm just so grateful for both that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So at any rate, that wraps us up. We're over time, but time flies when we're having fun, and wonderful is short. So first of all, I'd really like to thank both Philip and Syed for coming and for gracing us with your knowledge here, and to all the people who have been at the webinar today. It's been sort of quiet today, but I guess everyone is on vacation mode. And please do follow up, continue conversation in our LinkedIn group, on Twitter, and reach out to Syed for anything that, with the paper or at the job market or whatnot. And Philip, maybe you should just really quickly type your website in the chat box so that everyone can come over there and check all your great publications. So with that, in that case, the only thing that we have left is the upcoming survey, Ben, with Ben Shepherd.
Yeah, let me say two words about this. So for those who missed it at the beginning, we're going to take a break over the northern summer. So there's not going to be a webinar during August. We'll be back in September. So please keep an eye, as Hannah said, on our social media. You can find us on LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn group. Please do go ahead and join that. If you have any trouble doing it, just reach out to Hannah or myself and we can send you an invitation. We're on Twitter, so please give us a follow on Twitter. And we have a mailing list as well. So you'll receive an email after this session with a link to the mailing list. So please do sign up for that so that you can keep in touch with our future events. And so what we're going to do—
the website then. So this will be posted.
The website as well. So tprforum.org. You can see that there are links there to the videos of our previous sessions, and this session will go up when we're done. And of course, a link to the mailing list as well. So please do keep an eye out for us. We will be active on social media over the break period. And what we particularly want to do is to run a survey of people who've been attending the webinars, and also people who might be interested in joining us, to hear more from you about what we can do to try and make this as useful and as pertinent as possible. So please do keep an eye out for that. We'll be launching it in the next couple of weeks. And with that, thanks to our two great speakers. Thanks to Hannah for chairing so well. And thanks to everyone for joining us. It was really a pleasure to have you for this session.
And to Ben.
Thank you, Ajal, for hosting me.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.